Okay, we are covering Hitler and the Nazis. So where we've left off is Hitler has basically had a great victory. Everything was going awesome. He's defeating France. He's pushing through the Ardennes forest. He's cornering the Allies here at Dunkirk. They flee, and he is trying to invade Britain. But he is unable to invade Britain, basically because of a couple of things: the Royal Air Force, radar, cracking in the Germans' code. They are never able to get air superiority. They're never able to break the will of the British people. So they go, okay, after trying that for close to whatever a year, they basically give up on that. So we're at May 1941, and they say, all right, let's turn our attention elsewhere. So Hitler was unable to invade Britain, so he turned his attention to the Mediterranean, North Africa, which is kind of the same, and the Baltic states. Those are those states kind of in the east of the country, close to Russia. While Hitler was focused on Britain, Italy had been making advances in North Africa. And they were moving from Libya over here, and they were advancing, all right, they were moving from Libya, here, and they were basically over here to the east. This is Libya, so we've got Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. They were moving from Libya to try to get over to the Suez Canal, which is over here, all right. They're here in Libya. They have Sicily here, so they can like land troops here. They're trying to take over the Suez Canal. And so they moved east from Libya towards Egypt. The goal was to take control of the Suez Canal. This was important, and we've covered the Suez Canal in the past, but this was important because whoever controlled the Suez Canal could easily move supplies and troops back and forth from Europe to all sorts of places, Europe to Africa. All right, so again, imagine if you're trying to get resources. Do I get like just a world map? All right, so here is our Suez Canal. Imagine that you are trying to get troops, resources, whatever, from anywhere basically in Asia or East Africa or the Middle East. If you're trying to get it into the fighting area, which is basically all over here, this Suez Canal is super important, all right? And again, these armies are not cheap to operate. These armies need a ton of natural resources. These armies need a ton of supplies. We have to move troops. There were soldiers, for example, from India that were fighting in World War II. And so we are going to want to be able to use this Suez Canal in order to do that. The idea is whoever controlled it can easily move troops and supplies back and forth from Europe to Africa. What else did we say in it? From Africa, I'm going to say the Middle East and India. The Middle East and India. Now, Italy had spread its forces too thin, though. So Italy is trying to go and take control of the Suez Canal. They spread their forces way too thin. They had more people, all right, they had more soldiers, but they tried to move and attack into Egypt, and they spread their forces very thin, and they couldn't maintain their supply lines. And this is an important thing, not just for this lesson, but for any lesson on war, is that armies must receive supplies, food, all right, ammunition, and other supplies. Modern armies cannot live off the land. They can't just find what ammunition. It's not like you're going around with a spear and you can just like sharpen your spear. You're going around with a sling and you can just pick up rocks. You are a modern army. You are trying to feed hundreds of thousands of people. You need gas. You need ammunition. You need food. And so you have to be resupplied in a very sophisticated way. If you have 100,000 people here, you're not going to be able to find the resources that you need to keep that army going here. You need to be reinforcing them from your mainland or from some area that you control. And so anytime that you have an army, a modern army that is like pushing, you always have to think, what are the logistics behind whether or not we can resupply them? Because if we can't get them food or ammunition or reinforcements, then they're going to grind to a halt. And so you could have 100,000 people in an army. It doesn't do a whole lot of good if they're all starving. Okay? So, as a result, the logistics of the Italian army were not so hot. And as a result, the British had forced Italy out of Egypt. And so at this point, Hitler is wrapping up in Britain saying, okay, let's chill out on Britain. We're not going to win that one. So he sends one of his most trusted generals, let's see here, Erwin Rommel, probably a name to know, Rommel, to command the Axis forces in North Africa. Rommel is known as the Desert Fox, and he helped the Italians there, and there was a German army there. Under his command, the battles were more, I think, even. It wasn't this, so they helped, but there was basically throughout the whole war, there's a large kind of back and forth going on in North Africa. That's all you need to know at this point. The German army had to send troops down there. Now we get to one of the most famous parts of World War II, where Hitler basically goes all NWO and just betrays Stalin. So they have this non-aggression pact. I hope we will remember there's this non-aggression pact saying, we won't invade you, you won't invade us. Well, what Hitler does is he turns on the USSR and invades. He just says, guess what? Gotcha. And he does a surprise attack. This is like an interesting war with a bunch of surprise attacks. Gotcha! This famous military operation, and again it is famous, is known as Operation Barbarossa. Barbarossa. There we go. And it targeted with an E in there, 3 cities: Moscow, capital; Leningrad, a major city in the north; and Stalingrad, a major city in the south. Okay, Leningrad, Stalingrad, Moscow. And so, initially, the German army, especially based on kind of taking this surprise attack, they are extremely successful. They are running over this territory, and it looks like it's going to be kind of a repeat of how successful Germany was in Western Europe at the beginning of the war. However, a couple of things happen. After the initial success, Germany's pushing through, and they actually get to the outskirts, meaning like the suburbs areas of Moscow. Up in the north in Leningrad, the Germans surrounded the city and conducted a siege. A siege is where you just cut off all of the supplies and you try to starve people out and starve the army out to make them surrender. The siege lasted for 3 years, between 1941 and 1944, so most of the rest of the war. Millions of Soviets in the city died due to starvation. However, the city, and so the conditions in there, it's very famous. We're not going to do some deep dive into it in this lesson, but the conditions in that city were terrible, and it's, again, a very memorable and important part of history. However, the city never surrendered, and eventually the Germans were forced to, what did I say? Were forced, I was going to say to retreat. Was forced, I'll say, what, to retreat? To retreat. In Moscow, Germany's advance quickly reached the outskirts of the city. However, this occurred during the Russian winter. And we've covered this a couple of times in World War I. We've covered this for Napoleon. This is super important. Russia's winter is particularly harsh. It is really, really cold. It's not like being cold or like a snow day. It's like negative 20 degrees, like wind chill cold. It's like colder. It's like so cold that machines freeze and don't work. All right, Russia's winter is particularly harsh, and the Germans didn't have supplies or tanks that could handle the cold. have supplies that could handle the cold. They didn't have cold winter gear. They didn't have tanks and weapons that were made that they could operate in that sort of cold. And Hitler made the decision to continue pushing to try to capture Moscow instead of digging in for the winter. And that was a mistake. And again, we're only covering this at a very kind of bird's eye level. We're using broad brush strokes. All right, the Germans weren't able to take Moscow, and were eventually, what did I say? Moscow pushed back, eventually pushed back. And in the end, Operation Barbarossa was a massive failure. So he basically, Hitler, so the two things we really kind of covered here. Italians are not doing so hot in North Africa. They're trying to take the Suez Canal because of its strategic position. They are unable to do that. Hitler's kind of got to send Rommel to clean it up. Rommel never wins, but it ends up getting a little bit better. It's kind of a stalemate. It's back and forth there in North Africa. Then he betrays Stalin. He attacks the USSR. Initially very, very, very successful. However, based on the Russian winter and these cities refusing to, even while they're like being starved out, refusing to surrender, they are unable to be successful, and they end up having to retreat from Moscow, having to retreat. Next time, we are going to cover the United States. Getting in. Pearl Harbor. Lend-Lease. It'll be good. Good stuff.